I'm with Andy Mitten from United We Stand. How are you, Andy?
Fine, thank you.
Safe trip over?
Yeah.
So the first United We Stand was released in 1989. Pretty much your journalism career probably started around then, around United and that. How has your relationship, say the club, the manager, the board, the players, developed throughout that? 'Cause you have worked for the official magazine too.
Yeah. It depends who you ask, and what my relationship is like with individual players. With some I got on very well, with others less so. I've had run-ins with some, I've had fantastic relationships with others. A couple I've become good friends with, and they've been out with them socially with my wife and their wife. And obviously the ownership of the club has changed as well. So when we first started, we did a lot of interviews with directors, people like David Gill, Peter Kenyon. Peter Kenyon said, if you ever want to call me at home, here's my number. And then when the Glazer takeover happened, that all just changed completely, on the record at least. There was a real disagreement into, I don't approve of the Glazers, and I don't think that I ever will. So there was an issue there. And then I stopped doing stuff for the official mag at that time as well. I'd done a column for them up until 2005. So with the club, good and bad, I think the most important thing is that we keep our independence and we're respected for being independent, and that we're respected. So when Ed Woodward took over this year, we got an interview with him, sat down with him for 3 hours, and we had a good chat, and there's some issues we had to leave to one side, otherwise we wouldn't have got the interview. But we spoke like adults, and I'm interested in getting opinions for our readership on the issues which affect our readership. With the players, pretty good, I'd say. You often find that players become much more interesting when they stop playing, because they can open up.
No longer in the bubble.
More. Yeah, and they'll often give you a quote, and that can be twirled against them if they're not careful. So I'll give you an example from this year. We did an interview with Eric Steele. I had a 2-hour sit down with him, really interesting. Now, how did we get that interview? Because somebody who knows me and knows him said, trust Andy, he's not going to stitch you up. And it gave us a really interesting interview, loads of original insight, and he could do that because he'd just finished working for the club. When the interview came out, in United We Stand, our readers really liked it, but some of the papers got it and honed in on negative quotes, used them, and the headlines which came out in no way reflected the content of the interview. If you read those headlines, you would think that Eric Steele was being highly critical of David De Gea, when actually, in 80 or 90% of his quotes, he was being very positive about David De Gea. So Eric Steele gets pissed off, David De Gea gets pissed off, and you could forgive them if they felt like saying, you know what, I'm not going to speak to journalists again.
Oh, yeah.
I felt that I was honest with him. I reflected his thoughts accurately, and we did in United We Stand. Just a shame how it turned out in other areas.
But speaking about players and trust, it was a few months ago during the summer I interviewed John Gidman, and before the interview we did speak about trust and using quotes and the whole lot, and I sent him transcription and the whole lot. He did mention you as being a journalist. He did trust, and obviously you did a book with him in the 80s. And the next question basically is, you have wrote a lot of highly acclaimed best-selling books, and it's just kind of a series when I'm talking about it, from the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. I have heard, maybe you are writing a book about the noughties. Does it accurately describe how players have developed, maybe more professional nowadays and more probably concerned of how they go about their ways?
Yeah, if you look at the 80s book, and you mentioned John Gidman, and it's full of stories about professional footballers drinking far too much beer with bad diets, and their shenanigans with women and some things they shouldn't have got up to. I think they've become far more professional. I remember speaking to Roy Keane about this, and he said when he arrived at the club, we used to go out on the beer 2 or 3 nights a week, and when I left the club, the foreign lads, as he called it, had come in, and everything was much more professional in terms of the diets. And he said if you hadn't moved with the times, you would have been left behind the times. The different decades, there's certain traits which were specific to them. I did think about doing a book on United in the 60s, but I found with the 70s, a player's account would be hazy and it required a lot of research, and sometimes they remember things which weren't factually correct. So they'd say, oh, this happened and that happened, and I think, well, that was 2 years later and you were playing at that club, and it was a nightmare to do. So I will do one on the noughties. maybe in a year or two or 3 years. And back to the point on Gidman, it is about trust, because if they don't trust you, they're not going to talk to you. And if they do, then they'll tell you everything. And I think those books work and sell well because I try and get stories which you haven't heard before.
Unique.
Original stories. And I think there's so much journalism out there now where it's not original, it's just regurgitated or amplified, that if you can offer something which is completely original, then people will pay money for it.
Would you think that can be difficult? But I think with United we stand every month. It is unique content. It's not the same, and I'm sure you get loads of entries every month.
Yeah, we do.
And you have the choice to pick from stuff that you feel is different.
If people are going to pay money for your mag, it's got to be worth buying. There's no point them paying if they can read something online which is just the same. So when we interviewed Ed Woodward, for example, we didn't put it online for free. We put it in the mag because there were costs attached to that. You know, I interviewed him in London. You have to get to London. The train fare's not free. You know, there's print bills we've got to pay. There's designers we've got to pay. So journalism's not free. And if we're going to invest in it, which we do, then there has to be some sort of business model. And I know it sounds ridiculous, the word business model with a fanzine, but there has to be. What's the alternative to us? Work for free. You know, you can do that at certain stages in your life, but I certainly couldn't work as a journalist for free. I need money. I've got a family. I'm travelling to Iran next week to do a story which I passionately believe will be a brilliant story, which no one else has written. It's taken me 6 months to set up. The cost of my expenses before I've even reached there is £1,500. I've not even been paid for the piece yet. You know, that's going to cost the magazine close on £3,000 or £4,000 to do. They can't just give it away. They've got to charge somewhere, whether it's through advertising or through people buying the mag. So with the books, I try and get original stuff where people read it and think, didn't know that, didn't know that, didn't know that. And it's very enjoyable when you get that. And when you get an interview like with John Gidman. And John was funny because we both got drunk together. And he said at the end of it, he rang me a few days later and said, I better have a look at it. And I thought he's going to put a red line right through everything. And he didn't. He said, can you just be a bit stronger about my ex, one of his relations? And I thought, you know, that's your opinion, John, but you have to abide by the libel laws of the country where the book's published. So we reached an agreement.
Obviously back on the club, you've been quite vocal about the singing section and that you approve of it. About a month ago, Scott the Rev from Public Mancunia issued a petition about a teenage section. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's good. I'm very wary when people just pop up online and say this is a petition. I think things come from behind the scenes discussions, from face-to-face meetings, and I'm wary of what I call clicktivism, where it's put a like here if you're against so-and-so. It's very easy to come up with a good idea, but it needs two sides to sit down and to talk. I think it's a good idea. I think when I was a kid, Old Trafford was accessible to me and my friends who could turn up and pay to stand on the Stretford end with money from our paper round. So I think it's a good idea. I'd like, in an ideal world, for changes to be channeled through either Must or Musa, because they're democratically elected supporter groups. I'd like them to have a relationship with the club. I think that would be good. And I find that frequently now I get people saying, this is my idea for a campaign, can you retweet it? And I'm thinking, okay, well, who are you? And it's like, well, do you want to sit down and talk about it? So, well, actually, I'm in Illinois and I've never been to England. And okay, but who's the one who's going to get the stick if this doesn't come off? You know,
who's going to speak to the board about it?
You've not left your house, and you're putting this idea. And sometimes they are good ideas, but other times they're ideas and there's a reason why they haven't happened. With the singing section, I know it's not perfect. I can understand why people are cynical to it, but something needed to be done. And I think that I was at the first one, Real Sociedad, and it was brilliant. I stood in the ground in the middle of it, and it was absolutely brilliant. The whole end sang. The second one was more problematic because long-standing season ticket holders were moved, and they were annoyed, and I can understand that. But I've looked the people from the club in the eye, and I think they want to improve the atmosphere at Old Trafford. There's loads of reasons why it's got so bad in the first place, and the club or predecessors at the club have been to blame for that, but I think it's a step in the right direction.
But I think even, say, with the singing section, I said this Barney too, a lot of rival fans I've seen have been slagging us off over it. And looking up and down the country, and at their stadiums and their atmosphere, it's not much to look at.
No.
And, you know, my point is always about it. You'd always get United fans disagree with this and that.
Yeah.
But the fact we're doing something about it,
Yeah.
you know, it shows a bit of intent that it needs something that needs to be fixed.
Yeah, it's good. I personally have put a lot of time into, you know, drafting articles which have been as part of that, and it's frustrating sometimes where you see people have put a lot of time into it, far more than me, just to be knocked down by someone hiding behind a pseudonym on the internet. I just think, you fucking knobhead, you know. But freedom of speech, people are. As for people saying it's a bad idea, they're entitled to their opinions. But I stood in it during that Sociedad game, and I thought it was brilliant. Yeah.
A question I asked Barney as well, just imagine you're David Moyes' assistant. I say you're Steve Round because you're obviously younger than Lumsden. You have a chance to bring back 3 former Manchester United players of any era. Who would they be and why?
So could I bring out Cristiano Ronaldo?
Yeah.
Well, I'd start with him because he's the second best player in the world. Former players, and from any era.
Yeah.
What? So you could like get Cantona and
Of course.
bring it. Well, Cantona and Ronaldo up front. Imagine that. That would be brilliant. And Roy Keane in the middle. So they'd be free. First 3 that have come to my mind, but I'm quite happy with that selection. Keane's the best captain I've seen in my time watching United. Great person. Sometimes an angry person. Sometimes.
The thing is with Keane, he's a winner.
Yeah, he is, and he won trophies. Ronaldo's probably technically the best player I've seen at Old Trafford, and Cannonara had the rest, didn't he?
Charisma.
Yeah, he's a main man, wasn't he? You know, saw him score the winning goal at Newcastle away in '96 on the way to winning the league. I better put Andy Cole in there because he'll tell me off if he reads this. Coley would just be there running in and just tapping them all in at the end.
And a question, just the last question, obviously. It's a question you asked a lot of your guests on the Now That We Stand podcast. Would you rather be bummed by a horse without anyone knowing, or not bummed by a horse and everyone thought you had been?
I've never actually been asked this before. I know that I ask everyone, and I love some of the responses. I would probably... I think if I had been, and I wasn't... I don't think I would like to have gone through it, because I think if you had to live with the private anguish of being bummed by a horse, I think that would weigh heavily mentally. Whereas if
physically.
Whereas if I hadn't been, and everyone thought I had, I think over like 5 or 10 years, it would eventually fade away. I mean, at first people will be pointing at you saying, "There's a bloke who's just been bummed by a horse." But I think over a period of time, things would settle down normally, if that would be possible, having been taken from behind by a horse.
I think the best response on the podcast you've got, my own personal opinion, is Paddy Crowned.
Yeah.
Has to be.
He wasn't happy, was he? I don't blame him. I mean, he was right. It is a rude thing to say. And to ask a 74-year-old man that was rude.
Look.
And I apologised.
I'm just here with Barney from Red News. How are you, Barney?
I'm alright, yeah, good.
Good trip?
Yeah, but we've not had a pint of Guinness yet, so we've had to be sober before the talk. Which
Plenty
is a bit
here, I guess.
uncomfortable. You're in Dublin and not having a drink. It seems a bit weird, but
Absolutely.
later.
Well, Red News was the first Manchester United fanzine. It was launched in 1987. What influenced you to start the fanzine?
Well, there'd been just started. I mean, there'd been a few fanzines earlier, but they'd just started building up, and there were about 12 or 13 around the country, and United didn't have one. So basically, there was a group of people that we all travelled with from all over the country, really, and we got together at Aberdeen at a mid-season friendly, and the game was called off, so everyone was in the pub, and it was suggested by my mum, well, United need a fanzine. So this took, as it did in those days, the fans, we'll think about it. A couple of weeks went on, and then we said, right, we're going to do it. Who fancies doing it? I was a student at the time, so I was immediately, well, I'll fancy it, put my hand up. And then that's how it formed. So within a couple of weeks, we said we'd just do it on old-style typewriters. Let's sell one again. All we did was sell it in K-Stand. We sold 50 just in K. Then that grew to 100. 2 games later, gone. Then the big one really was we played Liverpool. We sold a couple of hundred, and then we thought, oh, this will get, this is really taking off. And then from there it just went from strength to strength, and it was so different. You were working on typewriters, you were electrosetting the headlines and stuff. So it was mad.
But obviously there are 3 Manchester United fanzines, and they're all very different. I've obviously read the 3 and then I like them all. I have time for all of them, and I read them all. But with Red News, you obviously have the PDF content on the website, you got social media, you got the forum, and of course the fanzine. Now up and down the country in the UK, you do see some fanzines from other clubs that are closing down now because I guess the price of print and so on, and the interest. Would you ever maybe think of Red News going more modern with a blog, or is it just basically fanzine?
I know the bloggers get a bad reputation, and I think that's just because there's that many, and it's suddenly there's so many that have come out of nowhere. But I think it's like anything. The good will survive and the bad won't, and people will find and read the ones that they want to, and they won't read. So I think with a fanzine, it's more, we've been a visual presence at the ground, so that is different. We're sold nearly at every game, and I always think print is in decline. There's no denying print is dying, and for a long time, that's a terrible trend. But you think everyone has got a phone, they're on their iPad, so they're not going to want it like they used to. So you adapt or die. But I would hope that definitely in the next 5-10 years there will always be the 3 fanzines, because the club, and I've had this said by someone at the club, they see us in their glass ivory towers and they know we're selling, so it's almost like, we'll try our best, we might not be able to do much on some certain things, but they know we're watching them, and that is so important, and that's why I think fanzines are different than any other kind. Because you're sold at the match, so but everything, people, we're still here, we read off years ago, and all the fanzines are still here, and you have this proliferation of it, but it will change, and which way you'll go with it. I didn't think we'd be doing digital 5 years ago. What is it? The iPhone was only out 5 years ago, so who knows what's coming next.
I think the main thing with going to games, I've always loved getting fanzines. It's my first game I got a fanzine edition. And when you buy the official programme, you know what with fanzines, they're getting an objective on it, and you're speaking to a fan's point of view instead of a Brandon point of view, and obviously at the minute there's a lot of trials for the singing section. Recently the Republic of Mancunian, the blog Scott the Red, has a petition for the teenage section. What are your views on that?
I think it's a great idea. My view is you're never going to have something that everyone agrees with, so your best bet is just going not the majority, but where you think we've got nothing to lose now. Old Trafford is so bad. You compare it to the away support, which has been great this season, the away fans, better than ever. But something has to give. So we may disagree with certain aspects of the singing section, but we've got nothing to lose. And you've got to encourage young local support at Old Trafford, because otherwise United are missing the trick. Because if we do have a barren period, if this is the start of a barren period, you're going to rely on local young support, as we did in the 80s, to carry us through. So it's a no-brainer for me. We'll argue and we'll quibble about certain aspects. But
the one thing about the singing section, teenage section, that appeals to me is I've seen grounds up and down the country, and the atmosphere isn't particularly good elsewhere. And some of their fans might be slagging us for the ideas we're showing, or at least we're doing something about it.
Well, that's it. There'll always be someone taking a pot shot, and United has so many different views now. But nothing to lose. Why not we give it a go? And I hope, standing from that, we're a lot closer. It may not be in the next 10 years, but I'm sure one day it will come back. I'm sure it's safe, it's rational, it's sensible.
That's the thing, there hasn't been safe standing in the UK before. So
this is it. It's just, again, it's logical and it's modern and it moves with the times. And the Old Trafford configuration, they could do it in United Road. The good thing is Edward Woodward said last month, move position, we will try and aim for this.
This is a generic question I want to ask you. So imagine you're David Moyes' assistant.
Lumsden or Round? Which one?
Round.
Right.
You've been given the power to bring in 3 players. Now these 3 players are former Manchester United players of any era.
Yeah.
Who would the 3 be and why?
if I'd have to choose players I'd seen, because I always think you can't really judge, I would say Eric for the panache. You'd have him as a cult hero. Straight away he'd give you the lift. And it's always the Robbo or Keane. For me, we were blessed to see both, but I'd always go Robbo because he could do everything. He was just magnificent, and he carried a team that wasn't good, where Roy Keane was superb in a great side. And then the third, I would say, that's a tricky one. I think Ronaldo, really, because we all had our moments with him, but he was just the best player. Eric's the greatest player I've ever seen. Ronaldo was the best player I've ever seen. And you never know, we might see him back one day.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Thanks, Barney.
Right, cheers, Del.